Okay, recording has started. We will be posting these videos as we have with all of the other events on the project website. In addition, we will be posting the polling exercises so you can take a look at those. Okay, let's get into the presentation. And we just want to start with a brief overview of the existing transportation element. So the transportation element is largely a policy document. It's used to guide investments in a multimodal transportation system, guide decision-making around transportation, and really kind of chart the vision as well for the community regarding mobility and transportation. The element includes two volumes, volume 1, which is focused on the policy and goals, and volume 2, which includes all of the technical information required under the Growth Management Act, things like modeling, concurrency, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that technical data will all be updated. It'll also be used to help analyze the land use alternatives, and the transportation element, like the other elements of the comprehensive plan, are largely figured around supporting the land use plan for the community, which is something that we'll be looking at as part of this process. So there's 4 main goals in the existing transportation element, and we'll be doing review of these and allowing for input from the community for any changes to goals and policies. 4 goals involve supporting growth, greater options and mobility, operations, maintenance, management, and safety, and finally sustainability, which is going to be a big theme of this comprehensive plan update, as we are going to be embarking on the city's first climate action plan, which is already underway. So the transportation element updates, as I said, a lot of the technical information and modeling will be updated. We'll use it to test land use alternatives for transportation impacts. The 6-year transportation program, which is more detailed and has more associated funding with it, will be updated and is updated annually anyways, but there will also be a new 20-year project list, which obviously looks out a little bit longer term and can be a little bit more general in terms of the funding that's been identified. And then as projects become more of a priority, they can get shifted to the 6-year transportation improvement program. Lots of opportunity for community input on priorities, and we'll provide a summary later in the presentation on some of the input that's been received for past efforts. And some of the new topics that are likely to be considered for the update are things like technology, flexible design standards, micromobility, which is things like bike share and scooter share and those types of small electrified vehicles. First mile, last mile, which is typically associated with transit connections, transit itself, and there are some transit changes being planned by King County, and then, as I said, the update or new 20-year capital project list. This is a summary of the community visioning themes that came out of the community visioning project that wrapped up in the spring, and we've used this diagram for each of the Planning Summit events. This is a synthesis of the priorities that came out of that project, and the ones with the green box just indicate ones that are directly related to the transportation element. So having a diverse, inclusive, safe, and walkable community, options to drive, walk, bike, and take transit, and then resilient infrastructure and social networks, which includes transportation networks. So now we'll get into a few slides that go over some of the existing conditions of the transportation network. And this is really interesting. So on the left-hand side is the current street network showing the full build out. But as you can see, there's a lot of streets that have dead ends and do not connect. Sammamish also has only a few arterials, which do a lot of the heavy lifting for carrying vehicle traffic. On the right-hand side is a map that shows what the effective network is if you take out the dead-end streets, and you can see it's significantly less dense. As part of the Development Regulations Phase 2 project, which wrapped up last year, we did put in significantly new standards and requirements for connecting dead-end streets. So as projects move forward, it's likely that we could see further build out of the effective network. But we're still, having to deal with a lot of dead-end streets that were built in the past, which does limit connectivity and options for vehicle traffic and disbursement. something I'm sure many residents have experienced, traveling around Sammamish. So this is interesting. This is some data on commute patterns, and given the impacts of COVID and the pandemic, this is somewhat of a moving target, but we pulled a couple of data sources, and in the chart that's shown on the screen, there's some comparison to other communities. And so this looks at how people commute to work. And Sammamish is pretty similar to all its neighbors. The other cities that we looked at were Issaquah, Redmond, Kirkland, and Bothell. So some cities with better transit access and more sort of intense urban development. Yet the numbers are fairly similar. So a couple things I want to draw attention to. Drive alone, and this chart is the 2020 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So only 2020 would include part of the pandemic, and the 5-year estimates tend to be a little bit more accurate, at least under normal times, than the American Community Survey 1-year estimates, which I also put out each year. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So drive in carpool, 9%, public transit, 7%. But again, very similar to the other communities. The highest is, I think, Redmond and Issaquah, 10%. Walking, quite low. And then work from home is interesting. Sammamish is the highest at 17%. Bicycle, quite a bit lower. When you compare that to the 2019 American Communities Survey 5-year estimates, it was 9.7%. So that's probably a decent baseline in terms of what was happening pre-COVID. They also put out 1-year estimates that tend to be less statistically accurate. I think the margin of error on the 2021 is about 4%, so not too bad. But in 2021, the estimate was 47.6. So that is just a huge change that could have very, very big implications for the future of the transportation system, as well as transportation needs for particularly residents in the community. So this is something that we'll continue to track. I expect during the project, we'll have some updated information and see if it starts to tick down. I think there's also some outreach that we're planning to do with major employers to kind of get a sense of what some of the trends are. So that could really be a real game changer, because as I'm sure many know, the transportation systems are typically sized and structured and mostly around the commute. So fixed route bus service. So those are buses that stop at a regular frequency and in the same sort of locations. There's two main routes, Route 269 and Route 216. You can see that they connect both into Redmond and into downtown Seattle. And there are some changes in terms of, I believe, frequency and routes that are being planned for Sammamish in the future. So we'll be tracking that as part of our existing conditions work. All right. There's also the community ride, which is an app-enabled on-demand trip. So unlike the fixed route, which just runs on a continuous schedule, the community ride is app-enabled and on-demand. Professional drivers, it has more limited service for the hours shown there. And trips may be curb to curb anywhere within the service area. So it's more destination to destination, but is another piece of the system that is important for certain users. There's also the community van. So it's a local shared community-based trips, includes volunteer drivers. It's kind of like sort of a carpooling on steroids type thing. Metro provides the vehicle, fuel, maintenance, insurance, staff funding, and monitoring, and it's available 24/7 and flexible to community needs. So another really good resource. And we'll see how, demand for this service might change as commute patterns, continue to evolve coming out of COVID. Van pool and ride share. So there's 55 van pools from Sammamish, so quite a big number. Saves gas, reduces emissions, so it could be something that we look at also as part of the climate action plan. Everything is included, gas, maintenance, insurance, and it's flexible in terms of how often that's used. And there's the link for the website for those that are interested in finding out more information. So this is a map. This is from 2015 from, I believe, the existing comp plan. This is showing the non-motorized network, and it highlights shared use paths, which is in orange. The green color is a paved shoulder, which would be useful for biking. Sidewalks are shown in blue, and King County trails or path are shown in red. So you can see there's quite a bit of gaps within the system, particularly related to sidewalks and dedicated bike facilities. There is some very nice off-street or off-road paths in the city, but generally some fairly significant connectivity gaps that are something that we could look at. And knowing that biking and walking facilities are a high priority for the community, it's something that we'll be continuing to look at as part of this process. So in 2019 and 2020, as part of the development of the draft transportation master plan, the city did some extensive outreach, and this graphic is from the outreach report, which is really, really well done. And this highlights some of the issues that were brought up from the community. So we just want to touch on them at a high level. Connectivity, which we just highlighted both from a vehicle and from a non-motorized standpoint, is a polarizing issue. There are many dead-end streets, but oftentimes from, the resident perspective, there are some advantages. So we know that in some cases they are desired, but again, it causes challenges in terms of mobility and connectivity for transportation activities. The lack of reliable transit is a community concern shared by many. Again, there's only 2 bus routes, fixed bus routes, and then those other services that we described. So it is fairly limited, and something we'll continue to look at. The schools and school districts share similar concerns about the transportation system. Pickup and drop off at schools is a major issue, I know, in Sammamish and many other communities that we've worked with. So thinking about, how we address that in a holistic way and in collaboration with the school district, I think is really important. And because of that limited connectivity, the congestion on the arterials is a major concern. Again, a lot of the traffic gets funneled on a few of those major arterials, and some of those listed here are Sahali Way, Issaquah, Pine Lake Road, 228th would be another. So there's only a handful of arterials that really have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. As I said earlier, there's a desire for more options to walk and bike through Sammamish. I think, generally there seems to be a fair amount of options if you're looking to walk and bike kind of recreationally, but sort of as a transportation function. It's a little bit more limited, both because of the lack of proximity from many residents to destinations, as well as gaps in the network. And then finally, concerns about the pace of growth and the perception of infrastructure not keeping pace with the growth are strong. And that's something that we will address as part of the transportation improvement program, and really to support whatever the preferred land use alternative. And at this point, we haven't developed even the alternatives yet. That's something that will be starting, to think about later this year, and will evolve in more detail early next year with community input. So just some of the opportunities, and I think they're fairly obvious from some of the background information that provided, but the ability to expand the biking and walking infrastructure. And I think what's exciting is there's a lot of communities that are looking at ways to do that don't involve necessarily expensive redevelopment of streets. Something like a greenway could be something to look at in Sammamish, which is sort of lighter touches on signage and better crossings, typically done on low volume streets, but can be a way to create safe bike corridors, without having to spend huge capital dollars. So there's a variety of great models out there that we can explore as we move into the transportation element update. Ability to enhance street connectivity. A lot of the newer streets are being built out as new development comes online or is permitted. And fortunately, the city now has, new standards that will require those connections, either at the time of the development or to accommodate it in the future. So we do expect that street connectivity will continue to improve. Opportunity to look more at mixed use development where people live in close proximity to shops, services, amenities, and activities. That proximity is really important from a transportation perspective. And that was the subject of the last planning summit, where we looked at some of the mixed use centers within the community. And those will be, some of the areas that we'll be looking at as part of the land use alternative. Enhanced transit access, again, that's managed by King County Metro, but the city does have the ability to provide input and influence that. And, oftentimes transit routes can change based on land use changes in the community. So if there's changes that might happen in the mixed use center, or the town center becomes more built out, there could be opportunities to look at enhancing transit access. And then micromobility is a great way to really shorten distances. So, where it might be too far to walk, it might be, reasonable to take an electric bike or a scooter or something like that. To reach your destination. So I think there's quite a bit of opportunities, and it's an exciting opportunity for the community to explore these as part of the element update. Okay, that is the end of the presentation. Just wanted to give a quick plug for the website. Please consider signing up for updates and tracking information on the website, as it'll be the most up-to-date information on where we'll be in terms of events, things like being at the Planning Commission, City Council, and standalone events. And you can sign up to get updates. We do have a blog. We will be doing a blog post at the conclusion of the Planning Summit, which tonight is the last event, once we have a summary pulled together. So stay tuned to that, and we'll be continuing to update that during the project. You can follow the city on social media, which will include some updated information on the comp plan update on Instagram and Facebook. So encourage you to do that. And contact information. We want to make sure that we're accessible. So my personal or my work contact information at Framework is there. Evan Fisher is the city's project manager, and there's Evan's email. And then we have two emails that are associated with the website that we monitor: info for kind of general questions about the process or something in particular. And then if you would like to submit a comment, you can use that email there, and we frequently track those. And then now we will go into Slido. So I will switch screens and pull up the Slido screen, and then give people a minute to be able to join. So 1 second here. Okay, so you should be able to see the Slido screen. I'm going to bring up the screen share, or the sort of intro slide. Okay, so there's the code, and you can also use the QR code. So we'll just wait a minute and allow people to join. For those that haven't had a chance to, just go to the website, enter in the code, and you'll be in the system and be able to respond to the polls. I think we have 4 questions tonight. Again, similar format as the previous events. Okay, I'm gonna start the first poll now. And we'll be able to see as people are inputting. So if you need more time to join, we'll make sure you have enough time to respond to the first poll. Oh, that's popular ideas. That's not what we want. Hold on 1 second. Okay, here's the first poll. This is a word cloud, and it's sort of a fill in the blank. What I like most about mobility options in Sammamish is, so this is currently in Sammamish. What are the things that you like about mobility options in Sammamish? So the larger green words are those that have been inputted the most time. So right now, trails appears to be the #1 response. There are some new standards in the development code too, that came out of phase 2 that do require street connections and have limits on block sizes, but there's also the ability to provide non-motorized connections like trails. So we do expect to see more trails being built out as projects go through the permitting process. So some of the other responses: sidewalks, transit service to downtown, the van options, which we went over earlier, the non-paved trails for walking and hiking, and I think biking. People liking the connections that do exist. New signals at crosswalks can really help with connectivity, particularly along across major, streets that carry significant traffic. So we have 20 responses so far, and looks like there are a few that are still typing. We'll just wait a few seconds and see if anyone else is filling it in, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, there's 2 more responses coming in, and then we'll move on. Okay, so trails was the top response, and I'm not surprised by that. That is my perception that trails in Sammamish are definitely one of the highlights of the transportation system. Move on to the next one. Also a word cloud, so it's sort of the opposite of the last one. The biggest mobility challenge in Sammamish is. So connectivity is the top response so far with last mile. And I think one of the things about connectivity, which I failed to mention earlier, is, one of the challenges is the topography, as well as, natural features and streams and things like that. So it's not just the dead end streets. There are definitely some physical challenges that, other communities don't have to the same extent. Okay, so connectivity's #1 response so far. Last mile, sprawl, safety, and sidewalks are sort of in the next category. Some of the others include traffic during school pickup and drop off. Again, big issue. No bus lane, I think that says. Yeah, no bus lanes. Hills and dead end streets, which we just touched on. School congestion again, crosswalks, getting people out of their cars, lack of sidewalks. Choke points, school start times. So I know, staggering those times can be definitely a strategy for sure. Not enough bus service. Too many people driving. Looks like there's a couple more responses coming in. We've had 20 so far. Okay, we'll just wait 10 more seconds. Looks like there's one more response coming in. And, it's interesting that a lot of the responses here do have some similarities to what we presented in terms of the summary from the previous outreach. So I do definitely see some consistency there in terms of topics. Okay, we are going to go to the next one. Looks like one more response came in. And again, we will share all these on the website. So look for that. Word cloud. So this is sort of looking to the future, and you had to pick one improvement to the transportation system to improve mobility. Blank is the one improvement for mobility I would like to see in Sammamish. Sidewalks, connected sidewalks and bike lanes so far. Pedestrian overpasses at school, remove barricades, mention of roundabouts, which can, have benefits for traffic flows as well as pedestrian safety if done appropriately. Town center, so people can walk to shops, land uses to lessen car uses. So again, some of that gets into proximity distances, but again, there are sort of emerging micromobility technologies that can kind of reduce those distances. Easier access off the plateau, pedestrian safety, connections between neighborhoods. So, connecting roads is more challenging, but there might be some potential trail connections that could provide at least non-motorized connectivity enhancements. Queue jumps for buses. Basically just give buses the priority within the system. That signals. No more free parking. Creative ways to get students to school. Safe for walking be 1, not 3 in plan. Synchronized lights. It looks like we have 19 responses so far, and 3 respondents are still filling it out. Center turn lanes and sidewalk on East Lake Sammamish Parkway. Shuttles between schools. Shorter timeline on street repairs. Another comment about staggered school start times. Okay, we'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, we are going to move on to the next, I think it's the last question. So this is an open text response. So as you respond, and it can be anonymously, but you can respond and it'll just show your response and they'll scroll down the screen. So if you had one sentence to describe your vision for more mobility transportation / transportation in Sammamish, what would it be? So far, desire to be able to live car-free, fix the choke points, a more walkable city to services and trails. So again, the connection to the land use plan there. Remove barricades and increase density in the town center, connected network, streets, path, and trails. supporting multiple modes. Probably can't read all of these fast enough, so I'll just kind of pick some highlights. Desire for more walking, connecting, shuttles, vans, other mobility options. Development requirement for connectivity, which we do have in place as of last year. Sort of using land use to drive transportation solutions. Service to the light rail. So there will be light rail, pretty soon along the east side, including in Redmond. Plan has safety listed at 3, it should be 1. Protecting neighborhoods from cut-through traffic. Yep, always a hot topic. There's a lot of different strategies to be able to do that. Slower driving, watchful, educated, walking to destinations. Looks like there's a couple more coming in. So my colleagues keep telling me that we need some sort of music when we're doing the polling. So maybe for the next, summit events or online webinar where we do the polling, we'll try to incorporate that. Let's see, shuttle bus connecting to light rail, easier to be car free, more sidewalks and lighted crosswalks, walkable and bikeable town center with transit hub. Like there's 2 more coming in. We have 18 so far. So thank you for those thoughtful responses we received so far. On the Road Again by Willie Nelson. Yeah. I actually did make a playlist once for a street project where we're doing a charrette that was all songs based on streets. So I should have thought of that for tonight. Great idea. Separated micromobility in the town center. And there's 1 more coming in. Yep, maybe 2. We'll give it another 10 seconds. Okay. Car rental, so short-term car rental like car share. I mean, we were just talking about that in the office the other day. For a period of time, there were all these car share services in Seattle. Most of them have gone away, but it was a pretty amazing sort of option. And another plug for the town center and a transportation plan that is citywide. So thank you for all those. Again, those will all be summarized and shared on the website. So let me stop sharing my, well, no, I'll keep the screen share on. And I'm going to go to the Q&A. Okay. So I'm likely going to refer to some of our transportation experts on the panel to help me answer some of these questions, including this first one. How does the transportation model incorporate transportation from nearby cities, county, and state, including roads and trails?
I can jump in, Jeff, and answer that.
Thanks, Doug.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug McIntyre, the Senior Transportation Planning Manager at Sammamish. And so this question is an interesting one. So the city uses multiple types of models to try to predict traffic flow through the city and into the region. And to answer that question, we actually do work with our neighboring cities to get their data for land use, which is sort of the fundamental piece of modeling. And we do put that into our model. So we assume trips from other jurisdictions, as well as our residents going to those other jurisdictions. In fact, we're actually working with the city of Issaquah right now. They are updating their own traffic model, and we're providing data for them. So it is definitely a collaborative effort, and we do model that information. So,
thank you, Doug.
Yep, thank you. Good question.
Yeah, next question. When the transit system is fully developed in the region, what percent of trips are expected to use transit light rail? I certainly don't know that off the top of my head. It is something we could look at in terms of, say, the modeling for transit usage and ridership for the planning for the east extension of light rail. Doug, do you happen to have any information on that?
Yeah, the way that I would interpret this question, which is also another good one, is about maybe what our goals are for what the percent of trips would be in the future.
Yeah.
It's a great question, and if you recall the slide from earlier in Jeff's presentation about what we would call the mode share for the commuters, whether that's by driving alone, carpooling, using the bus, walking, biking, that kind of thing. So transit is definitely one of those modes that we would hope that people would use as transit gets better. The usage of transit is not very high right now. So I think a good goal for us is probably, if you're assuming the 20-year planning horizon of the comprehensive plan, it's probably maybe 10% of commute trips. I think that's probably a little bit optimistic of a goal, but as the light rail system comes online on the east side and the connections, the bus connections to those light rail stations gets better, the hope is that that percentage of trips is much higher. So, without saying anything definitive, I would say a good goal is probably in that maybe 10% range.
Yeah, great response. Thank you for that. And what is expected to be automobile? So, I mean, theoretically, you'd have a 10, if you went up to 10%, whatever the delta is, would be a reduction in automobile, which from the previous slide is 65% from the 2020 data. So you would hopefully see a proportional decrease in automobile use. Okay, that's all the questions there. And I'm just going to look at the Q&A in the, thought there was another question. Actually, is there a question I just missed? I think I can't see it. Oh, there we go. I didn't scroll down. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna take a few more questions here. How do we plan a transportation plan that addresses safety? I mean, analyzing safety data will definitely be part of the background analysis. Doug, do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, man, you guys are having a lot of good questions tonight. So safety is definitely one of our top priorities when it comes to transportation. And really, there's kind of two pieces to it when you look at safety. There's the data side. How many collisions are we seeing on the city's roads? And then also the project side. So if you see hotspots for collisions, what are the things that we can do in the city's control that can help to alleviate some of those problems? So the city recently passed earlier this year a local road safety plan, which is a pretty data heavy document, and it really gets at where are the collisions, how severe are they, and essentially suggests a project list out of that to address those areas. So that is something that the city council did, I believe it was in springtime. So we use that data, we use that information to inform our project lists. And the project lists are a crucial part of the comprehensive planning process. And Jeff mentioned it a couple times in his presentation. We have both an annual 6-year transportation capital improvement plan that we update every year and send to the state. And that has our prioritized, sort of loosely prioritized list of projects that we want to do. And then we also have a longer term list of projects, which is a 20-year list. And that 20-year list is really central to the effort that we have in front of us for the comprehensive plan. So our plan is to really get some good input from the community about what are some priorities for investments in the transportation system, whether that's, intersection improvements or lane, corridor improvements, even technology, as well as non-motorized, which would include biking, walking, and that kind of thing. And so that is definitely going to be central to how we address safety in the city. I see a lot of questions coming in, so
yeah, we're going to keep you busy. I'm so thankful that you all are here tonight with me to help answer some of these great questions. So next one's just, I think, is a comment. Could we include light rail stations and lines in our presentation? Absolutely, be happy to do that going forward. Next one, Doug, I think will be for you. Does future traffic modeling assume decreased traffic due to remote work?
Yeah, so I think when I answered the first question, I mentioned that we have multiple types of models. So without getting too technical, because I myself am not a traffic modeler, that takes an engineering degree. But I do use modeling data, and I talk to our traffic team as well as the consultants who do the modeling. So um, the short answer to that is that we have a model that predicts within a 6-year time frame of where trips will go in the city and out of the city. And then we have a much longer term, sort of a 20-year planning horizon model, and that's called a forecast model. And so in the forecast model, we do assume the decreased traffic due to remote work. And that Jeff mentioned earlier in the presentation that that's kind of a moving target right now. COVID definitely is, it's had a big impact on the commute patterns, especially in the city like Sammamish, where there is a little bit more work from home happening. So what we've done in the past is we've tried to capture or take traffic counts at all the entrances and exits to the city, on and off the plateau, to really try to isolate the commute trips. And we did see a pretty steep decline in the early days of the pandemic. It did tick back up a little bit. And as of right now, we are assuming a 15% reduction in all commute trips at the peak hour. So when I say peak hour, I mean the rush hour, when people are most likely to be performing a commute trip. So that was sort of a long answer. The short answer is yes, we do assume that.
Great, thank you. Next one, does the city have emergency routes for events like snowstorms and earthquakes?
Yeah, I might not be the best person to answer this question, but I do have a little bit of knowledge here. So without getting too far into it, though, the city is currently working on an emergency management plan. I think that's actually being drafted right now. I don't know the exact timeline of that, but we are looking at emergency routes and modeling for those events. So that is something that is happening. Snowstorms might be a little bit different. What we do have for that is a map showing the priority routes for plowing. I know that's always a hot topic when it snows, but the city's first order of business is clearing the arterials, and then it generally kind of goes from there once the arterials are cleared. So yeah, I don't know, Audrey, if you maybe have a little bit of detail on the emergency management side.
You answered it very well. So
Okay.
I can speak a little bit more to the snowstorms, but as Doug mentioned, we do have those priority 1 lifeline routes to clear our principal arterials first, and then everything else has lower priorities after that, but still important to get to. But we have to keep certain lines open to help us with response and keep those roads cleared. And then, as Doug said, we are working on an evacuation emergency management model right now.
Thank you. Next question, in general, what levels of traffic count reductions have you seen or have there been for the periods of 21, 22 versus 2017 and 2018, considering work from home changes? You have a sense of that, Doug?
Yeah, I can maybe speak a little bit in generalities here, but we did see in 2021 or the early days of COVID, I believe it was about a 30% reduction that we had. And then as we did a second count on commute trips, we assumed about a 15% based on that data. So it did drop off a little bit. And again, these are peak hour trips, so it's not all commute trips, but it is the commute trips that happen at the rush hour. And so yeah, it went from about 30% to about 15, and we something that we want to keep track of as we go forward. So definitely, as COVID evolved and as the work from home shift evolves, we want to keep an eye on that. I've mentioned traffic counts a couple of times, and I just wanted to add to that we have an annual traffic count program that happens every April, and it's at multiple locations throughout the city. I'm sure everybody on this call has driven over the tubes that are in the road. There's a little silver box either in the median or on the sidewalk, and then connected to a tube. As you drive over the tube, it takes a count. So that is our annual program. And when I've been talking about the traffic counts we've done for trying to get a handle on commute traffic, that's been sort of additional level of traffic counting. It's on top of that. And again, we targeted the entrances and exits to the city for that data.
Great, thank you. Next question, don't you have a plan for reduced automobile use if continue, well, so let me just move my thing here. If continue the status quo, people will continue driving. What can Sammamish do to reduce driving? So I'll just start by giving a plug for the climate action plan, which is going to quantify this topic from a greenhouse gas sort of climate impact point of view. So that data will be forthcoming. And then Doug, do you have anything or anyone else that you'd like to add to the response there?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good point. Definitely something that we want to look at in our policies. Definitely, some of the technologies that are out there can really help us. If we can find a way to embrace some of that, I think we can do a better job of getting people out of the single occupant vehicles, which are probably the least efficient way of commuting.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Can info on where earthquake faults are and liquefaction zones be made widely known to all folks? Outside of the transportation, but does anyone have information on that? I do not. Okay. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll try to follow up on that one. We just don't have that information with us, but if it's available, then it can certainly be shared. Are city infrastructure, bridges and culverts good for big events such as earthquakes?
I don't know if I have a specific answer to that question. I don't know if Audrey, that's something that you can jump in on. Or...
Yeah, I guess I would need a little bit more clarity about if they're good for big events. Everything is designed to meet certain specifications. A lot of our bridges are inspected every year, but in terms of good for bigger events like earthquakes, I'm not quite sure how to answer that one. I'm not sure if who submitted it, if you could kind of clarify, I guess. I'm happy to come back to the topic too.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Senior housing not being counted towards housing targets should encourage this housing that essentially generates no rush hour traffic. It's sort of more of a comment. I mean, it is true that the impacts from a transportation perspective for senior housing are somewhat different. And we know that it's something that, the community has expressed a desire for. So something that we're definitely going to be looking at as part of the land use plan. Doug, this might be another one for you. What's the capacity rating, or maybe they mean level of service, of current connections, Sahali and Lake Sammamish Parkway?
Yeah, I might need a little bit more context on this one too. So without getting into a long discussion, the city did look at what we would call the volume over capacity standard for segments and corridors in the city. Ultimately, the city council adopted a intersection-based level of service system, so we don't have current data on the volume and the capacity for those corridors because the system is focused on intersections. But if I can put my information in the chat or something, and if somebody wants to follow up with me, it might be a good phone call to have. But I hopefully am answering it the way that it was intended.
Okay, thank you. Are we considering trails and sidewalks the same thing? I'm not familiar with trails around Sammamish outside of the parks. I would say that we typically think about trails as a bi-directional off-road kind of facility. It could be along street right of way, or it could be in a forested environment or through a park. Whereas sidewalks are typically within the public right of way along a street edge.
I would just add that the way that we look at that in public works and we talk to our parks counterparts, that essentially the trails are outside of the city's right of way. And when we say right of way, we mean basically the edge of the sidewalk to the other edge of the sidewalk. And so in public works, we focus on everything within that boundary, and parks focuses on all the trails and such outside of that boundary. So we don't count them as the same thing.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful, thanks. How often are traffic counts updated? Commute trips seem about back to pre-COVID the past few months, at least some days of the week. I think you kind of answered that earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we do an annual traffic count every April, and so that's throughout the whole city. Most of the major intersections and roadways are counted in April, and that's for baseline data. And then the commute trip counting that we did, that's sort of a one-off or maybe an additional kind of effort. So we've done that. I believe it was so early days of COVID. I think it was toward the end of 2020, might have been middle of 2020, and then in early 2021, we did those counts. So we'll probably want to do another count not too far from now to just understand that COVID impact.
great, thank you. Well, traffic plans include more than just improvements to serve the town center. The answer to that is yes, but Doug, do you have anything you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is when we look at investments in the system, we always talk citywide. It is not just for any one part of the city. You know, for instance, the city recently improved the Issaquah City Road corridor. That is definitely outside of the town center area. We've also recently improved 212, which is also known as Snake Hill. And so, yeah, short answer is yes, absolutely. Our investment plans look at more than just the town center.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is also about bridges relative to earthquake preparedness. So that's another question we'll have to follow up on, similar to what was asked previously. Okay, lots of great questions. This is really awesome. I'm going to switch over to the Q&A for those that have been patiently waiting in the webinar chat, or not the chat, the question and answer tool. So we'll take them as they came in. How do you account for kids, retired, and non-working people in transportation usage? Doug?
So how do we account for kids, retired, and non-working people in transportation usage? So when we count traffic and we're looking at the vehicles, and actually now that I say that, we actually do capture bikes as well. So we don't necessarily break it out much further than that. But one thing that we do want to do is we're embarking pretty soon here on a transit study. And that's one way that we can understand a little bit more of ridership data for transit, and that will have a survey associated with it. So, you know, surveys will probably be a good tool to get at what I think this question is getting at, because there will likely be questions about, you know, who are you, what type of commuter or driver are you, that kind of thing. But the data that Jeff showed in the presentation is census data, which I don't know how detailed that gets. I don't believe it gets that kids, retired, and non-working people as well.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, a lot of communities look at things like safe routes to school, which are specific to kids, as well as, you know, recreational opportunities for, you know, folks that may not be as focused on, you know, commuting and things like that, or just some kind of qualitative things that are typically included in the thought process. Even with improvements to connectivity, how do you change people's behavior to utilize them?
Yeah, I can. That's a good question. So with new connections in a system, typically you're making a trip a little easier, and traffic tends to find the most efficient way to a destination. So it's sort of like water finding its own path. You know, it's very similar with traffic, that you don't have to do a whole lot to change the behavior beyond the improvement itself.
Thank you. Do you know what the age demographic of this group is? That is not information that we collected, presumably if you mean the attendees of this event, not something that we collected, but thank you for the question. Another question, which is a really good one, won't the city need to know what types of things in density are to be or being built in, for example, this town center to plan for traffic, transportation modes and means? And the answer to that is yes. And we will be working as part of the land use plan to prepare the baseline assumptions for that. That's something we're going to be getting started on here soon. And then there'll be different options for the alternatives that will also be looked at from a transportation perspective. So anything else you would like to add to that, Doug?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. How can transit be made available and go on East Lake Sammamish Parkway to either Redmond North or Issaquah South?
Yeah, so how can transit be made available to go on Parkway North or South? So we've had questions similar in nature to this in the past, and we have checked with Metro. We work really closely with King County Metro, and so a couple things are going on right now. One is they're actually working on a complete restructure of all bus service on the east side, and the reason for that is because of the light rail. Once that comes online, the whole bus system on the east side is going to get changed, and Sammamish is actually going to get some better service on the Route 269, and so that's happening. That's one thing that's happening. The other thing that's happening in terms of service for Metro is that they're actually having a really difficult time with labor. They've had a hard time hiring enough bus drivers to serve the routes that are currently on the road and plan to be on the road. So they've had to cancel routes and cancel some trips. So they're having a hard time expanding service, because essentially this suggestion here would be an expansion of service. And so Metro will always say that they want to make sure that they partner with jurisdictions to improve transit in the jurisdiction. But one thing that they take into account, they have a whole document about how they look at service, how they evaluate service, and then add and subtract service. And one of their highest priorities in that decision process is land use, and specifically densities. Densities of people and housing in one area drive transit service. It's probably the number one thing that needs to be there. So without enough people to use the service, they likely won't add the service. And so it's kind of somewhat of a chicken and egg thing too, because you want good service to encourage ridership of that service, but to get the ridership, you have to first have the good service. So it's kind of a circular thing. So that's a long way of saying that it takes a lot of partnership with Metro, and the conditions have to be right so that they can have a service that is attractive to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Thanks, great answer. Next comment, just a FYI, looks like it had been stated in the past by a previous public works director that the bridge versus culvert approach for the new Issaquah Falls City Road project would be much more stable during an earthquake, and it also allows for extensive wildlife connectivity. So thank you very much for that comment. Another comment, perhaps bus schedules could be posted to aid folks commuting to avoid those times for routes in their area. Certainly something we could look at. Thank you for that comment. Could trucks be banned from East Lake Sammamish Parkway? It is a cut through from Issaquah to Redmond for big trucks.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thanks for that. We've actually had this come up in a couple different ways. And so one of the things that is hard for the city is, so in this case, the Parkway is one of the freight routes in the city, along with 228. And that's primarily, my understanding of it is primarily because Redmond and Issaquah both designate it that way. And so, that connection is made through Sammamish. And so it would be hard for the city to, not designate it if the other neighboring jurisdictions do that as well. And then when it comes to traffic on the roads, short of posting a sign, the city wouldn't be able to necessarily enforce that. I think it would probably take a lot of resources to do that. But it's definitely something that we could talk about as part of this effort. I think all comments like that are absolutely, valuable. But yeah, definitely a conversation point.
Great, thank you, Doug. This is off topic, but does the Vision Sammamish include a Parks and Recreation component? Yes, it does. That will be led by the Parks Department, and I know they're gearing up to get started, and the PROS plan, as it is often called, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, will be updated as part of this project. Good question. Just by way of comment, a great way to encourage youth and teen passengers on Metro is that they now travel free on all Metro buses. Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Issaquah does have freight routes and somehow enforces them. Yep, I know freight routes on, Main Street there, and Issaquah is a big issue. As years ago, I know garbage, yard waste, and recycling trucks, when full, had to drive around differently and further than pass. So it is definitely a really important issue of how you sort of think about the truck network versus the other transportation priorities. So thank you for that comment. Looks like we've gotten a couple more now in the Slido. Does the city have any future plan to annex more nearby areas? My understanding is there's a couple of potential annexation areas that are identified in the map, so that requires a process of working with the county to get those designated, but I don't believe there's any necessarily imminent plans. And right on cue, David Pyle, I think, has something to add.
Yeah, so we have had some conversations about the potential annexation areas over the years. The most recent annexation area was the Mystic Lake annexation, and that was subsequently built out with a fairly large subdivision by Toll Brothers. There have been other developments occurring in our potential annexation areas under King County Code. There was a presentation that was done a couple of years ago to the city council, and at that point in time, the analysis was that it was more costly for the city to bring those areas into the city in terms of the revenue generated versus the expense of bringing them in, and that it was not fiscally prudent for us to do so at that time. So if anybody wants to know, I'm happy to mine out the council meeting, and you can watch the presentation on potential annexation areas.
Great, thank you, David, appreciate it. Up until about 2010, this is a question, East Lake Sammamish was a state highway, still basically is the same road, has not changed much. Okay, thank you for that comment. Might be another one for Doug. Is there any plan to convert dead-end streets or barricaded roads to through streets?
That's a great.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know in some cases there's houses built at the end of the dead-end streets, which would, preclude that at least for a street connection, but there may be other opportunities. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, this is a great question. Back in 2019, well, actually in 2017, and then 2019 and 2020, the city embarked on what we called the Transportation Master Plan effort. And that effort was really kind of a holistic look at how we should invest in the transportation system in Sammamish. And one big part of that was actually the barricades. The plan never got adopted. It's still a sort of a draft, an unadopted draft. But that was the closest we got to developing a plan, kind of a comprehensive plan for dealing with dead ends and barricades. We had a lot of outreach specifically about barricades. I've talked to HOAs, and I've had meetings with folks in neighborhoods about barricades. And, it's sort of a topic that there's, one side of the issue is people want it and want the barricade removed. And then the other side is equally as many people don't want it removed. So it's kind of one of those a little bit tricky topics. So we've tried to have really comprehensive understanding of that issue. They're all localized, so all the issues tend to be really specific and unique. So the city had never done anything up until that point about trying to get a comprehensive look at barricades. But again, that plan is not adopted. So I think under the comprehensive plan effort that this is all about, I think we'll want to at least touch on that topic again and see if there is, through our capital planning, a way to talk about projects that might connect roads. So lots still to happen. Definitely, nothing definitive yet, but it is a topic area we want to address in the conversation about our capital projects.
Thank you, Doug. Another question came in. How does the city manage overloaded trucks that could damage streets or bridges, presumably from, the weight?
Might have to pass that one to Audrey. I don't know. I'm not familiar with.
I think that might be it's a great question. We might need to follow up on specifics with that, but typically there's we do have some freight routes, as Doug mentioned before. I would imagine if any larger truck usually would submit a permit for use through the city to be able to go over a weight limit, but we can follow up so that we make sure that we're responding with the correct information. It's a good question.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have a comment. Effective April 1st, 1992, in June, SR 901 was completely dropped as a state route following outcry from residents on East Lake Sammamish Parkway. So thank you for that. And we don't have any other questions in the webinar Q&A. Is there anyone that would like to be able to make a verbal comment? We can unmute you and give you the floor. If you are interested in doing that, please raise your hand. We have about 16 minutes left if we need it in our programming.
Jeff, I also just wanted to make a note that I'm going to put my email into the chat. So if anybody wants to follow up with me, I know there was a few questions here that we didn't maybe fully answer. So I'll put it in there. Hopefully that goes to everybody. I feel like it might have. Maybe not. Looks like it might have just gone to the hosts and the panelists.
I think I can figure out how to post it.
Okay, we can also follow up. And for anyone that has a pen and paper right now, my email address is dmcintyre@sammamish.us.
All right, there you go. I got it into the chat to everyone. Okay, Mary Wichter, please go ahead with a comment. You'll need to unmute yourself. Yep.
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I did put one more thing in the chat box, but I know the city started off with the 2001 111-page public works standards for streets. And in 2016, they adopted like a 450-page one that has a lot of diagrams. And we were trying to do complete streets where you have roads, sidewalks on both sides, people can drive fast on those. And just today I was driving around and I noticed a lot of new traffic calming implementations where they add curbs or bumps or put a small roundabout thing in the middle or narrow the roadway or use chicanes, which are those sticks that you stick to the asphalt. So does the city maybe need to go through the public works standards for streets and update them so we don't build wide and then have to narrow them to get them safe? I'm just seeing a lot of that and I'm just wondering about it. And I know you want the original right of way to be as wide as you can so you don't have to buy it later. But if people are just driving fast and we're having to narrow it, it just seems like that traffic could be managed. Like I know they did the roundabout down by the boat launch going into Issaquah. They redid that so you kind of can't physically drive fast and it's much safer.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That's a good point. The city is actually planning to update the public works standards. As you mentioned, the last update was in 2016. And so I think that those types of more engineering and design things are probably more appropriate for the public works standards, but it's definitely something more generally that we can talk about in the comp plan. I think, this kind of gets at safety and, again, safety is one of our top priorities and always appropriate to talk about in terms of policy. So hopefully that answers the question, but I can definitely follow up with you.
Right. I also was driving on the road that goes from 228th towards Smith Elementary today, and it just has a sidewalk on one side. It's got 2 lanes, and on the other side, it's got a wide shoulder where cars can stop. or you can walk your 2 dogs, or you can bike. And it just seems like that sidewalk on one side would save money, slow people down, and give different opportunities for the street without, requiring sidewalks on both sides in the lanes, which people just drive really fast in.
Yeah, one of the things that we looked at as part of the development regulations phase 2 and the neighborhood design standards was right sizing the on-street parking. Because one of the things that I've found is that if you have too much on-street parking and it doesn't get used, then all the lanes look double wide and can contribute to, speeding and potentially safety issues. So making sure you get the street design right is really important.
Yeah, and wider streets also just make a lot more impervious surface, increasing stormwater as well and the pollutant runoff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. Let me see if there's anyone else seeing any hands up, checking the questions. Oh, wait. Looks like Mr. Ruiz, Roberto, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Recognizing that with use and weather, streets have to be repaired every so often. I'm just wondering if the repair crews are city employees or they're contracted.
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually sort of depends on the type of damage to the road. So our maintenance crews are city employees, and they try to manage all the potholes and all the wear and tear type of things that you indicated. If damage to the road is more severe and it requires something like a reconstruction of that road, the people doing that reconstruction are most likely going to be a contractor to the city. They might have more specialized equipment or specialized staff. But our maintenance crews do a great job. They're excellent. They work around the clock on holidays, all that stuff, and they are the best in the business. So we have a really good staff.
The reason why I'm asking is that I've noticed in the state of Washington, compared to other states where I have lived before, it takes much longer for all of these repairs to take place. And a good example is the work in I-5 in Tacoma, which I was astounded when I heard it took more than 10 years to repair. But I've noticed that it takes a little bit longer, and then in between fixing, people put these steel plates that make people slow down and create more traffic even when there's no active repair. So I'm just wondering if there's some ways to incentivize to try to complete the work much sooner and avoid having to put some of these steel plates when there's no work being done.
Yeah, it's definitely disruptive when there are construction projects in the roadway, but definitely something that we always want to address the problems as quickly as possible. Sometimes it might take a while, depending on sometimes things require design or there's snags in the construction process. Generally, when there's a steel plate on the road, there's a hole underneath that. So even if construction might not be actively happening, there might not be the full repair done. So just it kind of depends, but we always do strive to be as efficient as possible.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Great question.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, not seeing any more questions in any of the tools. There is a comment: city public works are great. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Yeah, it is really a great staff, and the maintenance crews are excellent. Like I said, they're some of the best. So very lucky to have them.
Yeah, very important. Okay, I'm not seeing any more comments, questions, so I'll just make one final call, and then otherwise I think we can wrap up for the evening. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I think this has probably generated the most comments and questions of any of the events. So not surprising there, transportation, really important issue. We will be posting the video, posting the polling results on the website. So please take a look for that. And as Doug said, if you have specific questions we weren't able to answer for you this evening, feel free to follow up with him, and I'm always available for questions as well. So again, for those of you that have attended one event, or for those that have attended all of them, we understand that you're taking time out of your evening to give us input, and it really is critical. for us, as we get further on the process in terms of refining the plan. We really want to make sure it reflects the priorities of the community, and we can't do that without active engagement. So really appreciate it. We're just getting started. There will be lots of opportunities for input as we go along the way, and really encourage you to continue to participate and encourage your friends and neighbors to also get involved. And if there's anything we can do for anyone, please just reach out. Don't hesitate. And with that, we'll conclude for the evening, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.